Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Infinity Gaming. It's me, Jogan, and today I'm going to with you guys and Blake J. Harris to talk about basically anything and everything about gaming. How you doing, man?
I am great. Thanks for having me on. I love your sweet background I mentioned to you. I guess that's a blanket up there, the Nintendo one, but it's a cool blanket. And thanks for having me on, man.
Well, it's like sound absorption. 100%. Nothing but the best quality
Yeah,
fleece
that's like
blanket.
a premium studio you got right back there.
This is like a significant upscale from my 6 months ago. I was working off a laptop stand. Now I got a
Progress.
now I got a desk and it's like, oh my god, night and day. I highly recommend it. So, Blake, you just finished a new book. It's the history. What's it called?
All right, so I wrote the book Console Wars about the battle between Sega and Nintendo, and I'm actually still finishing up the new one. It's called The History of the Future. It's about Oculus, Facebook, and the quest for virtual reality. I still have a few more weeks to go of writing it, and it comes out next July. But I'm really happy with how it's turning out. Hopefully, you'll enjoy it as much as you enjoyed Console Wars.
If it has the history of video games, it's already like a number one for me. I love like anything history. I was a history buff in high school, so like this is just like icing on the cake.
Yeah, and I'm the same way as you, and it's tough because there are not so many video game books or so many things that really show
Hmm.
you the behind the scenes in history. I think that's even changed in like the 4 or 5 years that since Console Wars and since I've been working on it. Not to say because of Console Wars, but just there's a lot more people that are starting to investigate that stuff, and I love it. And even I appreciate. Of course, I'd come on your show. Anyone who's interested in the history of video games, there's not a ton of people that are willing to actually look into it. So happy to chat.
Well, I was thinking there's no way you'd come on. I was like, "Ah." But you know what? I said I'd give it a shot. Like we were talking about Donnie being the big influence from before,
Yeah,
and it just he
and
was the one.
yeah, and I was saying that we should talk about this on the show because your friend suggested you reached out. You didn't know if you should, and I didn't even hesitate when I saw your email. I always just think it's so important to ask. That was
Hmm.
like one of the big lessons I learned with Console Wars. I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more, but
Hmm.
Console Wars was my first book. I had no journalistic background in the sense of like I could share things. Like basically, when I'm reaching out to these people like Tom Kalinske, Al Nilsson, anyone, it wasn't like, "Hey, I'm Blake Harris, the Pulitzer Prize winning,
Yeah.
journalist." Um, so it was. I was nervous to reach out, but if you don't ask, nothing's going to happen, and so it's important to take that risk. I think.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, it's just like one of those things where you look at it like my way. I'm 20 subscribers in, and I'm thinking IGN or GameSpot's probably asked you to come on for at least a podcast or something. And then I was just like, there's no way you'd say yes to me. And then you said yes. I was like, holy crap. I got to finish reading this book.
Well, to be honest, um, Console Wars, it's obviously it's mostly a business story, or at least that's like
Hmm.
the foundation for that's like the narrative engine for it. And so for me, just researching it and writing as opposed in addition to actually just telling a great human drama, I learned so much from these people at these companies, and definitely like one of the most important lessons I learned from people like Al Nilsson, the marketing guru at Sega, and Tom Kalinske, the president of Sega America, and all these guys was kind of just about if there are people out there who like your work or who are interested in what you're doing,
Hmm.
you should try to be as accepting and accommodating as possible. Like
Hmm.
whether you have 20 YouTube subscribers or 20 million, if you're coming from a sincere place, always obviously everyone has busy schedules, so it can't always work out.
Hmm.
But I, I'm always happy to talk with anyone that likes the book and helps spread the word because
Hmm.
uh, that's what it's all about.
That's cool. Like a few guys that I have had on before, they're always that way. Like Milton from AM2R, he was super cool. He was like, yeah, I don't care. Same as you. I don't care how many subscribers you got. As long as you want to talk about Metroid, I will talk about Metroid with you.
Yeah,
And same with the guys from Yacht Club. I had Yacht Club on earlier, and
Oh,
that's
yeah,
like,
that's cool.
yeah, I had Yacht Club on. I did a live podcast with the Yacht Club, and I was like, you know what? If I got Yacht Club, maybe there's like a shred of a chance for to get Blake. So I emailed you, and I was like, oh my god. So, anyways, after I'm done fanboying for now. Let's
All
strictly
right.
business, business. Anyways, I feel like between me and you, we both took a very similar arc as far as like getting back into gaming. Gaming was always a part of my life growing up. We weren't the richest family, so we didn't have we didn't get all the newest games and stuff. But your brother gave you a Sega Genesis,
Yeah.
and I watched your interview with Google, and in that interview, you kind of glaze over it. So I'd like to go a little bit more in depth
Sure.
and see like the arc of, okay, your brother gave you a Sega Genesis. What games did he give you with it, or did you have to go get your own games?
That's a good question. So a little bit background on that. So growing up, I'm turning 35 in a couple weeks. I grew up in the 80s, early 90s was like my formative years for gaming and stuff. And so my brother and I, my little brother, we got an 8-bit NES in either 87 or 88. It was like the coolest thing ever. Naturally, when the Super Nintendo was coming out, we wanted a Super Nintendo because we love Nintendo. We were Nintendo fanboys. But my parents, actually, my dad said that he wouldn't get us a Super Nintendo because, and I think I said during the Google talk that, he said there would be a Super Duper Nintendo and a Super Super Duper Nintendo. And of course, he was right in a way if you take a really long view of history. But my parents instead, they were willing to get us a Sega Genesis. So growing up during the console wars, I was on Team Sega. Not because I wanted to be at first, but because of just the circumstance. And so flash forward 20 years later or so, my brother wanted to get me a gift for my birthday. And my birthday is obviously around like the Hanukkah, Christmas season. So he wanted to get me a gift for around this time. He had historically given me really bad gifts. The most notable probably being the Grinch Stole Christmas boxer shorts. And I was just like, why are you buying me boxer shorts? I mean, they're not bad. I wore them, but like, come on. So he had gotten his first job out of college. He's like, I really want to get you something good this year. I don't really like people buying me gifts, but he's like, no. Like, what's the best gift you ever got? And I said, it was probably the NES or the Sega, that we got when we were kids, or the Sega Genesis. So he got me a Genesis. I'm not sure, it came kind of piecemeal from like eBay, and we got some games too. I'm not sure if he bought them or if I bought them, but basically when I got this Genesis after all these years, the main thing I played was NHL 94, which was one of my favorite games growing up, but then also Sonic 2. And so, I had kind of stepped away from gaming when I was around high school. It was never a conscious decision like, oh, I'm done with gaming. But I just noticed that whereas other people gravitated more towards it, I, for whatever reason, was not. I was really into sports and, writing about sports and stuff. And so I hadn't played many video games in the prior to getting this Genesis again, and I especially hadn't played many retro games or anything like that. So when I picked it up, I didn't really know what to expect. I was mostly just expecting it would be like, oh, fun and nostalgic and kind of cute, like a fun 15-minute thing. But then I found like, wow, this game really holds up, at least to me. NHL 94, it brought back a lot of memories. And then it also, now that I was an adult, made me think about what I usually think about, like, how did this get made? Who made this game? Why did they make this game? Why is it made this way? And then kind of taking a step back from that, started thinking about Sega. Obviously, they're no longer in the hardware business. What had happened? They were such a big deal at the time, and they had also seemingly come out of nowhere at the time in the early 90s. So I just wanted to know, like, what had happened, what was the behind-the-scenes story with Sega and with the battle with Nintendo. And so I went to a Barnes & Noble on 86th Street in Manhattan. It's like this really big flagship store. And I went in there thinking there would be all sorts of books on Sega and Nintendo. I looked for the video game history section. I thought it would be near the film history section or the music history section, but it did not exist. That was weird to me. Again, I was not a huge video game guy at the time, so I didn't know how weird or not weird it was, but I just thought like, wow, I know video games are pretty comparable with music and film these days. And so I asked the woman at the information desk where the video game history section was, and she practically laughed at me. And then I said, can I just get one of the books on Sega and Nintendo, or like history of video games, the business of video games, blah, blah, blah. And they literally did not have a single book in the entire store. The only video game related thing they had at this Barnes & Noble were walkthrough guides. And I thought that was just so weird for what is obviously a big industry, whether there are fascinating stories or not, and there absolutely are, that just that like a random Barnes & Noble wouldn't have a book that a person interested in video games can read. And so, it wasn't as if I left Barnes & Nobles that day like thinking like, Eureka, I'm going to fill that demand. But that was definitely like an informative part of the process for me. And it shaped a little bit too the way that I wrote Console Wars. I wanted it to be a book for anybody. I wanted it to be a book that you could, pick up in Barnes & Noble, whether you're a hardcore gamer, whether you just fondly remember it from back in the day, or just want to understand what the video game industry is.
Well, I feel like in that aspect you actually succeeded because, like, I've been reading this book. Like, when you said you were going to come on, I've been, like, hardcore reading this book whenever I got a chance, like, thinking of questions. I even got the audiobook because, like, I'm a truck driver during the day. So, obviously, you can't read a book and drive. So, audiobook. But I was talking with my mom. She's like, what's this book you always read? And I go, it's Console Wars. It's the history of Sega and Nintendo. And she goes, okay, what's it about? I go, it's basically the story of an awesome man named Tom Kalinske. Yeah. And, like, his amazing story. And she goes, what'd he do? And I, told him about the Flintstones vitamins and He-Man and Hot Wheels. And I go, he's basically responsible for my childhood.
Yeah, exactly.
And she goes, is this a book about video games? I go, yeah. She goes, let me see. And she typed up on Amazon. I think she's going to buy it for herself.
Yes.
And she has awesome. Nothing. Does not interested in video games whatsoever. I've talked to her about it before, and she's just like, why do you talk about this useless information? I'm like, it's not. I mean, it's interesting, because like me and you were both talking about, we're both history buffs, and we love history. And like for me, it was American history, and I'd read my American history book just for fun, because I'm a nerd.
Yeah. Me too. Proudly.
Yeah. I was like, yeah. And so when it comes to video games, when I started getting back into it, much like you, I wanted history, and I wanted it at all. And when I did the very same thing with you, I went to Barnes & Nobles, and there was nothing there. And I'm just like, what? Well, there's no video game history, you know what I mean? And then I went to the desk, and same thing as you. She actually did laugh at me, because here's this 20-year-old kid asking for the history of video games. And she looks up and she says, here's Console Wars. And I go, do you have one in stock? And she goes, no. I'm like, well, crap.
Well, that's awesome that they had it. It's even funny, too. Barnes & Noble, like, it's still, some stores have it out in like a, like a nonfiction section, but it's like usually in like their role-playing game section. So it's not the kind of thing that like people will come across. And I even asked them, I was like, can you at least just put in like the business section? But they have their system, and, I've got bigger battles to fight. But that's awesome that, 5 years later, you're on the other side of that, and you actually got the book that I hoped would be there for someone.
Yeah, well, I didn't get it at that Barnes & Noble. I actually had to go to another one, and it was in the role-playing section. I was just like, this has nothing to do with that, because it was just like a walk. I was going to go walk over and look for books, and it was. I'm like, oh, there's that book she told me about. And then, like, I lost the book a while back, so it sucks. But so I bought it. I have an iPad now, so digitally. So
awesome.
It works. Well, anyways, then like you said, your brother gave you that Sonic 2 and all that. Did you then go into expanding your nowadays? What year was this? This had to be like 2011, 2012, wasn't it?
Exactly. It must have been. It must have been 2011, or maybe like the Christmas of 2010. But it was around that time, yeah.
Okay. Did you decide to okay, I'm interested in this. I'm going to check out like newer games, or did you go strictly retro?
It started off strictly retro, so it was more of like the history buff nerd in me was what was driving me then, and so after being rebuffed from Barnes and Nobles, I did find that there are video game history books. I don't want to make it seem like they do not exist, and there are some great ones. A few of my favorites are David Sheff's book Game Over, which I always kind of thought about as my book being a sequel to that. That is like the business story of Nintendo resurrecting the game industry in the 80s. And then also Stephen Kent's Ultimate History of Video Games, which is a little bit more like an oral history type thing. So I spent like the next few months getting a hold of those types of books, seeing what was out there. They're either, out of print, a little bit harder to find. I remember the David Sheff book. That was the first time I spent $50 on it. It was like the first time I ever paid like above market value on Amazon just to like get a book. Like I guess it was a collector's item or something. I don't know. But and then as I was reading these things, that was when I started to kind of get more into the playing retro game side of it. If I'm reading about the making of Super Mario Brothers or Zelda or any of this stuff, it made me want to. Actually, my parents still had my Nintendo from when I was a kid, so I was able to get that. Also, do some emulator games as well.
You're lucky. You are lucky. I do we buy it all.
Yeah. No, I'm really happy that I still have the exact Nintendo that I grew up with to play. And yeah, so I started getting back into that. And then at some point, I bought a PlayStation 3 to play Batman Arkham. And then I've always been into sports and sports games. So, getting like the Madden games and stuff and those kinds of games. That's like what I would play just like at night when I'm brain dead and want to play some stuff. Yeah.
So yeah, once again, that's kind of similar to mine. Like I bought a PS3 only. My game was I wanted Infamous second.
Okay.
I wanted Infamous 2, and they sold it. I asked for the Jak and Daxter Collection, Infamous 2, and DC Universe Online, and they sold the Jak and Daxter Collection and Infamous 2 before I got to go. I called ahead, and they were supposed to save it.
It's a real bummer.
Yeah, but they gave me the Uncharted pack. Of 1 and 2. That's good. I say that I always credit those two games. The first game, Uncharted Drake's Fortune, as the game that was like, this is what gaming can be. Like games aren't just Mario and that really bad Batman game you bought on the GameCube when you were 10.
Right.
Here's a game that tells a story with characters, and like that's similar to me because I bought a PS3 and I was like, okay, we're off to the races now. And then that kind of that was the thing that jump started my thing of okay, history and games. I want to know it all. So I don't know half as much as I would like. I'd love to hear like the stories behind like Sony and their whole idea with Crash Bandicoot and Insomniac. I feel like there's a story there, and
there's so many. I mean, really, like when I started to get into what would like become the book. My first question or my biggest concern was that there like wouldn't be a story there. And I guess like what I realized is that whenever there's like a lot of money and especially like a pop cultural influence, there's always going to be some story there. I didn't expect it would be one as interesting as Console Wars turned out to be with, but like, every game is pretty fascinating, whether it's a hit or a flop. It's nowadays it's dozens of people, maybe even hundreds of people working together to try to create this, unified mission. And whenever there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, it's just hard to get everyone moving in the same direction. There's going to be, you're going to make mistakes. You're also going to realize things that aren't working that you think are going to work on paper. So it's just almost always a fascinating process. It's a lot like movies. And I guess that's where I would hope that like our cultural fascination and interest would end up going. Everyone loves behind the scenes movie stories, and there are so many outlets for that. With games, it's a lot different. Even when it happens, it's usually only with like, the franchise iconic blockbuster titles, but there really is there's a story behind every game, and most of them are pretty fascinating, especially for people who like that sort of thing like you and I. I understand there's a lot of constraints with people still working for these companies, so you can't be as open about it. And the PR process, unlike movies where you do kind of talk more about that making of thing, and people are more like household names, like directors and producers. But I would really like to see over the next 5 or 10 years, the amount of coverage of like the making of games, both new and old, really increase. That's something that I love as a writer and also as a reader.
Yeah, like you said, I think like there's so many stories that haven't been told yet. I'm excited to hear them. Like I'd love to hear the story, and you probably came across this. Like when Square Enix decided to leave Nintendo for the PlayStation. Like,
Right.
I'd love to hear that story. Like, there has to be a little bit more to it than just the CD wasn't working. You know,
Oh,
like
for
we can put
sure.
on cartridges or a CD. There has to be more to that, you know? Because before it was fine. They even had a tech demo, and then like that was it. Like, what was the backroom doors? You know, the backroom meeting there. But I feel like in a few years it's probably gonna change. But for now, like you said, I watched your interview again. You know, like I said in Google, and you had trouble talking to the guys from Nintendo even
Right.
about coming on, and I feel like that's another big problem because like Sony and Nintendo and even Sega, I think to an extent, probably don't want to talk about these things. You know what I mean? Like they don't. And someone paint them in a bad light, and they're like, "Well, you hush hush on that. They don't need to know about this. You know, enjoy the game.
Yeah.
Don't enjoy the story." And I
Right.
feel like that's super interesting.
Yeah.
That being said, like you said, you know, Console Wars is being made into a movie and a documentary now.
Yeah.
So how's that process different now? Is it like, and I obviously added a lot of pressure because he said you weren't done writing the book when it got picked up.
Yes.
So how's that different now when you're juggling a new book, a documentary, and a movie getting started?
It's a good question. So yeah, so we actually I met with Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg. Evan's Seth's writing partner and best friend and business partner. I think in January of 2012. So that was 10 months before we even sold my book proposal, which was basically like at that point I had done 50 or 100 interviews and I had an idea for the story, but I hadn't actually written the book. So it was before I wrote the book. And then we ended up selling the film rights to Sony with Scott Rudin producing, and he did a lot of my favorite movie adaptations of like The Social Network and Moneyball. And so, there was definitely pressure. Like I remember when my agent and manager called me to say that they had sold my book proposal, that I was going to get to be a writer full time, and I was going to get to write this book and know it would be published. And finally, something I write would be read by people beyond just like my mom and my girlfriend. And then I just remember like this feeling of like, oh my God, I did it. And then like this like record screech of like, wow, now I have to actually do it. Now I have to write the book. Like all I've done is now just put myself in a position. So I wrote the book knowing that was going to happen. And then we actually filmed some parts of the documentary while I was writing it, which was stressful at the time, but turned out to be a really good thing because it gave me a chance to reconnect with some of these people and really get even more intimate into the storytelling with them. And then I finished it. And so, I unfortunately don't have like so much stuff I can share about the film projects at this point. But I'll say that they're, both moving along nicely. And it's really nice, especially I'm much more involved with the documentary because I am co-directing it with my partner, Jonah Toulis. So that's probably, the one that's a little bit more special in my heart, at least at this time. But what's really nice about that is that with Console Wars, with the book, it was very important to me that I could write a book that would relate to your mom, like that it's not going to rely on like, hey, Sonic Green Hill Zone is so awesome, and if you go like over here, you can get these extra coins or these extra rings, and but in the documentary you can kind of do that, and you can do it in a way that's still very accessible because like you can see, oh, Sonic is like getting something good. You don't have to know that rings are good. You can just know it. So we're able to do a lot more with like archival material, with commercials and with game footage that I intentionally did not want to rely on in the book. But I think that we're able to get into for the documentary that is really fun.
Now, when because you said you were writing the book as you were filming like the documentary pieces, and like the movie got picked up during this time, did that influence your writing of the book? Like, oh, okay, I should word this section like this so it will translate better for the movie. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, that's a great question.
Because well, let me finish. Because
Sure.
Legitimately, the scene with Tom Kalinske when he goes to Spain, I could see that being like an opening for the movie trailer. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
the cab pulls up. He walks out, sees this factory, calls his thing, and get out of there. And then he runs in, and then it's just him in the cab, like, and then it's him on the beach with Nakayama, and then you can just bunch of flashes, So like, was that something, or was that like, no, 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 it's just happenstance?
It's more happenstance. If anything, it's actually the reverse, which is interesting. I mean, it's a good question. A few people have asked me that before, because the book is written in a way that I kind of describe as like literary film. Like I want the book to read like a movie where you're actually seeing scenes play out. But it wasn't because it was being made into a movie that I did that. And in fact, because it was going to be made into a movie, I felt like I didn't need to sell it as much as a movie. Like I already had sold it as a movie, so I could spend 30 pages doing that history of Nintendo chapter that's broken into 8 bits that is not a very visual thing, because it wasn't like, oh, maybe Hollywood's not going to adapt this because they wouldn't know how to do it. So for me, it was always just about the most accessible way to tell the story. And especially after speaking with these people, particularly the people from Sega, like they're so vibrant, and such a big part of the story was obviously just the vibe and just their personalities. And so to capture that, whether it was like Tom at a illegal factory in Spain, or on the beach with Nakayama, or the people staying up all night at CES, potential spoiler alert there, like that was just so much more about the best way to capture the story to honor these people than it was about like, how can I make a cool version of this, or how can I make it the most cinematic. And I especially, I feel that was really the guiding force because of decisions that I made with this new book. After Console Wars came out, it obviously has done very well, and I'm super grateful and so honored I got to tell it and that it has been received well. But there were, as I'm sure there are people that don't like the book. Because of the style of the book. And so I could feel that when I started very early stages of this new book, a part of me was like, well, maybe I should make it less movie-like. Maybe I should not go as much in that direction as I had, because I don't want to, face criticism, or maybe there's validity to those criticisms. And then the conclusion I ended up reaching was that decision would have been like made for my ego. And that is really not fair to the people whose stories I was telling in this new book. And that, as with Console Wars, I need to give the best delivery mechanism for their story, and which is probably going to be a more cinematic, in the moment, movie-like experience. And so I really do think that like that's just it's a great page turner way of storytelling. It's a great way to keep people invested. So it was not so much because I had a movie deal, and again, it was maybe even because I had a movie deal, it actually gave me freedom to do things that were less cinematic at times.
Yeah. So like, I don't know. I'm just kind of happy that for a second I was like, "What? You're writing in a different style in the new book?" I was like, "Oh crap! I don't know if that's gonna be good." But then you're like, "That's good." And you kind of went through the same process that I went with. You know what I mean? Like I had a guy comment on one of my recent videos about 100% being, "Oh, it's you don't know what to talk about." He wrote a 3-paragraph comment about like how it was on the Xbox One X reveal, and I said how I was disappointed in it. I didn't want what I wanted from it. And the guy wrote a 3-paragraph section about how the Kinect was gonna save it all, and all that good jazz. You know what I mean? Like I didn't know what I was talking about. It's gonna have better games than PlayStation. I was just like, okay. My first response was, fuck that guy. Yeah. But then the next response was, okay, maybe he does have some points, I guess. But at the same point in time, I said something in a way that made him respond in a 3-paragraph format. So apparently I said something that struck a nerve at some point.
Yeah. That's good. I think, listening to the criticism, especially when it's respectfully delivered, which isn't always the case, is important. Like, so yeah, in the end, I did not change the style because I didn't think that was best. But I did spend a lot of time asking myself, like you did, like, all right, well, what is this person actually responding to? What did bother them? Or what are there things that I can do that stay true to my style and what I think is important, but also maybe address some of their concerns. And so I do think like the writing in the new book is definitely improved in my opinion. And I think that, some of those people who maybe had issues with the style in the previous book will have less issues with this one. But at the end of the day, it's got to be, the whole joy of going behind the scenes is like being a fly on the wall or a fly in these people's heads and actually seeing it from their point of view. And that's, I can't stray from that.
Well, we're kind of already into it, so for those of you guys that haven't read Console Wars, just go pick up the book, pick up the audiobook, read that book. If you're into video games at all, I think it's a must read.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Trust me, great book. Well, let's get into your new book because we're already there.
Sure.
Your new book is all about VR.
Yeah.
And the future history of VR is what is that?
Oh, it's called the History of the Future.
Okay, History of the Future VR. What made you decide, because Console Wars, one thing that's always going through the Console Wars, the majority of the book is Sony. I was like, if he's going to make a sequel to this book, it'd be with Sony, right? He has to go with PlayStation.
Right.
He spent so much time on it. And then I read up and it's VR. I'm like, well, I mean, Sony's in VR.
Yeah. Oh, they are. Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting because, a lot of people ask if I'm going to write a sequel to Console Wars, like a direct sequel like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely something that at some point in my life I would like to do. But at the same time, what drove me to write Console Wars, as you know, was like, I didn't set out to write Console Wars. I was more just curious about like what had happened. And I fell in love with the character of Tom Kalinske, and that kind of took me into it. So I would much rather want to write a story that would be like a sequel if I knew the story first. Like if it was like, oh, here is a character at Sony, or here is a specific circumstance or series of circumstances. And I'm sure that they exist. I just haven't done the legwork yet, which is all a long way of saying that if someone else were to write it, I'd be just as happy to read it as I would be to write it. And I didn't know what the next book was going to be. It's hard because writing a book, at least the way that I like to do it, where it is narrative nonfiction, but it also is so historical. So it's not just a straight up like story. There is a lot of time and research devoted to it. Anyway, so basically I know that if I'm going to work on something, it's going to take 2, 3, or 4 years of my life. And when you really start thinking about stories, even ones that fascinate you, that's a tough litmus test. Like, do I want to wake up every day for the next 3 years and work on this thing? Is that going to sustain me? Is that going to be interesting enough? So I kind of struggled to figure out what should be the next book. And actually, let me pull this up. One thing I was considering was writing about Angry Birds. And
Jesus.
Yeah, I met with Rovio, and they actually sent me that book, and I think it was either Comic-Con or E3 in 2014, the year that Console Wars came out. I don't remember which one, but I was having lunch there with Tom Kalinske, Al Nelson, and Michael Kiraz, who's the son of a character in the book, and also a good friend of mine. And I was telling them, they're like, what are you going to write next? And I was like, oh, well, this Angry Birds thing might be there. And Tom and Al were like, no. I'm like, what, you don't like Angry Birds? They're like, no, Angry Birds is fine. We like it. But they're like, you got to do bigger story, something bigger. And they're like, what else? And I was like, I don't know. I kind of, I have been a little bit interested in VR. We tried the Oculus DK1, or maybe it was DK2 then. And they were like, oh yeah, you should write about VR. You should write about Oculus. So I thought like, all right, that's, if Tom and Al, they know their marketing stuff, they have a good sense of story. So that helped push me in that direction. And so what happened was, what initially got me interested in it was actually that there was an article about me in Popular Mechanics that it was about Console Wars.
Yeah, but Popular Mechanics.
Well, they do like science and tech stuff. But anyway, So they reached out and asked if for me to like do an interview, and they even did a photo shoot, and that was like all really crazy for me. I'd never been in a magazine before. I'd never had like photos of me taken. And so it was like a really big deal. My dad even came because he's a big Popular Mechanics fan, and it was like very surreal. Like, oh, my son's going to be in this magazine. So we're all really excited about, me appearing in a magazine. And I remember it was Mother's Day in 2014, and the magazine came out, and I was out with my family, and I thought like, oh, let me go to the bodega and see if the magazine is out, and it was. And so it was like supposed to be this big exciting thing of like, oh, look, mom, like I'm in a magazine. But I was so much more fascinated by the cover of the magazine, which was Palmer Luckey, the founder of Oculus.
Okay.
And I was like, so I thought it was significant that like on this moment that was like, I'm supposed to be into myself and like wanting like, this proud moment. I was like so much more fascinated to read about Palmer and Oculus and what they were doing. And that really planted the seed. And then that was, started to grow a little bit with advice from Tom and Al, and also actually trying their headset. And it was really, in addition to trying to find a story that I knew I wanted to spend a few years working on, part of that too was what is a story that is going to be important, or that I think is going to be important. The subtitle of Console Wars is Sega and Nintendo, the battle that defined a generation. And that's, a little bit tongue in cheek, but it was such a big cultural and pop cultural battle. And out of that story between Sega and Nintendo, we see that it changed the video game industry. Even if Sega's not around or Nintendo no longer has 90% of the market, like the influence of that battle actually made a big indent on the gaming industry. And so with virtual reality, I didn't know if Oculus was going to be able to pull this off, and if they were going to be able to do so within the span of when I would be writing the book. But I did feel like virtual reality, for anyone who tries it, for most people who try it, you come away thinking like, wow, this is the future. You don't even know what that means. It's just like, this is real. This is good enough. It's only going to get better from here. Yeah. And so I really wanted to dive into that world. And as with Console Wars, it really was another crazy, awesome, true life story. Mostly about a group of people coming together and trying to do something. And it's interesting too, because like Sega, there is a big underdog element to Oculus. It's this company founded by a 19-year-old kid at the time who has this vision of bringing back this technology that has failed so many times in the past. But he's got an invention, and he's got a contagious passion and curiosity that seem to give it a chance to succeed. And also just timing wise, where we are with computers and electronics and all these different components gives it a chance to succeed. But like, whereas Sega is an underdog throughout most of the book, obviously they do surpass Nintendo at some point, but they're still, the same team that brought them there. Oculus is a different situation because like midway through the story, they do get acquired by Facebook for a few $1 billion. And that does change the perception. It also changes what they're capable of accomplishing. So, that's just a very interesting wrinkle to this story. And that also kind of took me more into a Silicon Valley direction in addition to like the video game direction.
Okay, so like, what's your take on VR though? I mean, like right now we have 3 VR headsets on the market. You got Oculus, HTC Vive, and well, I got behind me the PlayStation one. Yeah. Which one do you think is like the most? Is the most successful now? Is the PlayStation one? Obviously, with PS4 and all that. But do you think in the coming years, do you think HTC or Oculus will surpass it, or do you think it's just going to be the PlayStation for now?
That's a good question. I think it also really, obviously depends on a lot of things, but I think it also kind of gets into this idea of like what VR is going to be, where the killer apps are going to be. And what I mostly mean is like, is it going to be in video games, or is it going to be in other areas like communication or productivity? And so I think that what's great about the PlayStation VR thing, and that's awesome about Sony investing the time and money into VR, and what it's going to continue to position them for years to come, is that I don't think VR is going to leave gaming. I think it's, there's so much great stuff you can do. And we already see that the Vive and the Rift are being used for things other than gaming. Not to say that they're not great for gaming too. They're probably actually even better. I mean, they're both more expensive systems. Yeah. But like, Facebook does own Oculus, and they are a social network, and they have some great social apps. And the Vive launched with Tilt Brush, and has really, I know some people in professional settings that use Vive for like modeling and stuff like that. So I guess we'll see. I guess it seemed like the real answer to your question is, if you look at it like a console war type thing between Oculus, HTC, and Sony, who's going to win? I just think that like that's not even really what the question is, because things are going to change so much over the next 5 years that those are not going to be the only players. Microsoft just launched a bunch of VR headsets. We're also going to really get more into like augmented reality and this convergence between VR and AR. So I don't really know. And Google as well. They launched originally the Cardboard, the really, really cheap way of getting into VR to give people their first VR experience, and then they launched Daydream. And that's relevant too, because as of now, there's basically like two types of VR experiences. There's the PlayStation one, which is $400, or I don't know what it is now. The Rift, which is $400, and the Vive, which is $500 or $600. But you need a PC. So you either need a console to play the PlayStation 1 or a PC for the Rift and the Vive. So, it's a significant investment, but then you also have mobile VR. So, and that is very cheap if you have a phone that's compatible. And then basically where we're going to be heading very soon, and which Oculus demoed at like their Oculus Connect thing, is just a standalone device. So we can kind of think about it like a mobile VR thing, but you don't have to buy the phone. Or as I was telling my wife last night, it's basically like a laptop that you wear on your face. It's a fully functioning computer, and Oculus has announced that they're going to start selling it for $200, next year. I mean, that takes us pretty far to the next step of where VR is headed. So I feel like answering the questions, who's going to win or what can we kind of expect, it's going to be so much dependent on the success of that sort of thing and who else gets into that market.
Yeah. Well, truthfully, like if in terms of like that, I think Oculus is going to make up a lot of ground. Like, because right now I think Oculus is the worst selling right now, isn't it? Like PlayStation's up top, and then I think HTC has got them beat. But,
well, it's tough too because, I think like the PlayStation has sold more than 1 million, maybe almost 2 million headsets, and Vive and Rift significantly less. But the best selling of all the things has been the Samsung Gear VR.
Yeah.
So and that's like powered by Oculus, or at least that has like the Oculus Store. And I know that at one point, like last year, they had 4 million active users a month. So yes, I think that the Rift, at least prior with last statistics, was worse selling than Vive. But I think that their ecosystem is larger than everyone's at this point. So anyway, but
I think that like I was like, yeah, what you said. I think Oculus is doing it the smart way, where they partnered with Samsung, and 90% of the times when you go and you see any HTC or any AVR thing, it's always Oculus powered. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and if you go to your local Best Buy, sometimes they have like things where you can experience Oculus, and it's cool and all. And I've experienced, like I said, PlayStation VR. I experienced the HTC Vive, and I experienced Oculus, but it just. For now, I think the technology is getting there, but for games especially, I don't think it's there quite yet. I feel like the best one for gaming is the PlayStation one, because I got to play that PlayStation Resident Evil demo, and that's great. But at the same point in time, you can tell it's a little janky. It doesn't work as good. It doesn't run as good. But like Sony has stated, they're viewing this as like the launch of the PlayStation 1. So this VR is like the PlayStation 1 VR.
Right, and that's like a super fascinating aspect of this book that I didn't necessarily realize getting into it. Like I think at the end of the day, we all know, as either historians or just as gamers, that what sells the console is the games. It should be able to do cool shit, but like unless you have good games, it's worthless. And whether, going back to the launch of the PlayStation 1 or even the Genesis in my book, the interesting thing, the thing that we kind of take for granted is that gaming exists. Like, people are making games, because if not for the Genesis or the PlayStation, there are other options out there that if you make a good game, you're probably going to make millions of dollars. That's not necessarily the case with VR. And since these games take a year or 2 years or 3 years to make, you have companies like HTC and Valve and Oculus and Sony meeting with developers, and imagine 2 years ago before these things have launched and saying, hey, developer, instead of spending, your time working on this new AAA title or this new game that you can make millions on, we want you to work for this new medium that has zero install base.
Yeah.
And, even if you sold imagine if a game came out on PlayStation VR and it sold to every single headset. That's 2 million headsets. That's like amazing. Best case scenario. But that's still nothing compared to what you have with some of these big titles that are, GTA and stuff like that. So it's just, it's this really hard chicken and egg situation where you can't have the hardware is not going to sell unless the software is good, and the software is not going to be made unless there's an install base with the hardware. So that's kind of become one of the more fascinating aspects of writing this book. Like, how do these companies try to accommodate that? And in some ways, they subsidize it. They continue to take a big loss. They're investing money. And I think that, like you're saying, you see Oculus everywhere, and that is because they have made the biggest investment in this. You can agree or disagree with their decisions or their approach to how they're trying to do this. But I think that regardless, as a fan of gaming, as a fan of VR, it's pretty admirable that they are putting so much money where their mouth is. And I guess we'll see the fruition of that in the next few years.
Well, like, I was talking to a guy at GameStop when I was waiting for Mario Odyssey, and I was talking to him, and I said, I think for now PlayStation's going to stay ahead, but you're going to see Oculus and Vive like start to pull ahead when the cost starts coming down for the headsets. When
Right.
Because PC gaming's on the rise. Like, that's what that was the news 3 years ago. That's the news today,
Right.
and you can still see that today. And like, more and more people are buying PCs. You can go to Best Buy now and buy a VR ready PC that can play Oculus or
Right.
HTC. And I feel like when, and obviously technology is getting cheaper, so that technology to make your VR capable PC is getting cheaper. So when all that comes down, and then like, I think I'm kind of curious to see what HTC is going to do in the next couple of years, because they're the most expensive one on the market. And Oculus, if HTC doesn't do anything, Oculus will just pull out right ahead, because I got my Samsung VR and that's run off Oculus. I'm already familiar with it, which is a great idea by Oculus.
Yeah.
And if HTC doesn't do anything soon, or like maybe in the next year or two, I think HTC might bow out. You see, and I don't know. I think Oculus is pretty much in there to stay. But HTC is one of those that I'm wary of, because I'm thinking you don't hear much on the news. It's always Oculus or PlayStation, and HTC. Well, it's the second like actual VR headset, the second best selling. It's got a price drop. That's it.
Right, and that's tough because I love the Vive. There's so much that's great about it, and it was great that they launched with with wands, with hand controllers at a time when the Oculus Rift did not have that. I think that's such a pivotal part of the experience that a lot of people appreciated that, rightfully so. But Oculus is backed by Facebook. They have a lot of resources, and they are able to be very competitive with the pricing. Whether that means selling at a loss or at cost or subsidizing other things. And HTC, we see, like, we can all agree that they made a great piece of hardware and that they are doing a great job of supporting it. But they are, have historically been a mobile company, and they have had some struggles in recent years. So it does put their fate in a little bit more of a perilous situation. So it is difficult to kind of see where the landscape's going to go.
Yeah. But so what you're saying is we kind of got like a Nintendo versus Sega situation.
Well, it's really fascinating because a lot of people have asked me like, could there be like another Nintendo, or who would be the next? Who would be like the next Sega, like an upstart hardware company, either in console gaming or we saw a few years ago with Ouya, which was. Yeah, well, but it was like, they made $8 million on Kickstarter. They were a huge deal at the time.
Oh, yeah.
So it was like a $100 Android-based micro console for your living room. And like the answer to that is just, it's so hard. Back then, the R&D costs were very heavy for Sega and Nintendo, but now they're in the billions. It used to be in the hundreds of millions. Like so for a company to come out of nowhere and really compete with Microsoft or Sony or Windows or any of these things, it just seems very unlikely.
Sorry, my sweatshirt was bugging me.
That's all right.
Yeah, but I mean, there is one that we haven't really talked about. Do you talk about the Hololens in the book at all? Like, do you
Yeah.
dabble in AR or is it just VR?
No, I talk about the HoloLens, and especially because, as we see with the few headsets launched, I think this month or last month, Microsoft is getting into VR.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, the technologies, or just for your viewers and listeners, virtual reality is you put on a headset and it's a completely immersive experience in a computer generated world.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Matrix in the most extreme form, where you're transported to somewhere else. Whereas augmented reality (AR) is you put on a headset or even like a pair of glasses, and you're fully existing in our current world, but you have computer generated images overlaid. So it's like the
Mm-hmm.
Terminator vision. It's like, oh, that's this guy. Here's his address. Here's his likes on Twitter, and so in the end, those technologies that seem very different kind of do converge at some point, because it is just
Mm-hmm.
the idea of 3D possible graphics existing, and it's a 3D world, and it's just a matter of how much virtual and computer generated content is around you. And so you can see, like we see with AR now with Pokemon Go, which is
Yeah.
a very it's not the full promise of augmented reality, but that is our real world, but it's introducing like virtual characters and other things that you share with other people. So anyway, the HoloLens is definitely going to be mentioned in the book. It's not a huge part of the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in the same way that we've seen a lot of hype and excitement for VR over the past 5 years, we're starting to see that with augmented reality, and probably that will be the case the next few years with Microsoft HoloLens, with Magic Leap seemingly eventually launching something. Then you even have other unexpected players like Snapchat, or the company Snap released Spectacles, which was kind of like a dipping a toe in that direction. But it's all just this wearable technology, and it'll be interesting to see where we go.
Yeah, I mean, like right now we're just in its infancy.
Yeah,
Like all the headsets came out like a year ago, wasn't it? Like Oculus, HTC, and PlayStation, they all launched last year. I want to say.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, like PlayStation. Oculus launched at the end of March in 2016. HTC Vive launched the first week of April 2016, and then PlayStation launched in the fall of 2016. And that's what's like so cool about it.
Mm-hmm.
That in a worst case scenario, everything we're seeing is just a great proof of concept.
Mm-hmm.
You're old enough to have lived through the introduction of many different technologies, and like
Yeah.
usually at first when these things come out, they're like not that impressive. You're like, all right, I could see like one day, you know, like I'm just thinking of like early smartphones. Like you're like, I can see how one day, but even when we try these headsets today, we can see it. It just doesn't work as seamlessly, or it's not as integrated with other people. It's not a big part of our life, but like it's very impressive to think of this as like Gen 1 of wherever we're headed. And I'm very happy about the progress that's been made in such a short time.
Yeah, like my thing is, I bought that headset day one. That was my, I was there midnight launch. I played it the next day for like 5 hours, and maybe I played 3 hours since. But I bought it knowing that was going to be the case, because I was like, this is something that's brand new. Developers aren't going to want to support it right away. They want to see where this goes. But I'm there because I want to see like they did the Spider-Man experience. And,
Right.
the guys who made Until Dawn. I don't know. Have you played Until Dawn? Like the
No, I
PS,
haven't.
play Until Dawn. Like that is a Halloween game. It's awesome. Man, my sister played it, but like they made a game that kind of is like a shooter, like those arcade shooters. And they made that game, and I got that. It's cool. Like there's experiences on there that's cool. Like with the Batman one, that's an awesome experience. But for now, there's nothing there that's like, I want that.
Right.
Doom's interesting me. I might pick up Doom in the next month, but I'm not gonna pay $60 for it.
Right. Yeah, it'll be. That's the thing. It's like I've been working on this book for 3 years now, and there's always people talking about like what's the killer app going to be, and I think it's fair to say that at this point and within the scope of my book, it doesn't exist yet, or maybe it'll never
Yeah.
exist. Like, I don't know when like there's definitely a lot of parallels between the virtual reality revolution and like the personal computer revolution, and I don't know like what the killer app for personal computers was. It was a lot of things, but I don't know that there was ever that thing that was like, oh my god, I got to get Microsoft Word. Like, I got to get this thing. It was more a matter of appealing to
I got to get Linux. I got to get Links. I got to get Linux.
Right.
It's got to be there,
It was just more a matter of like, there's so much available, and it's more just about it being a tool that okay, maybe I don't need Microsoft Word, but hey, I can now write a book instead of using a typewriter. So like, giving a lot of different options and giving these tools to people and letting them explore with it.
Well, as much as I would like the future of the VR to be like Sword Art Online, I don't know if you know that anime.
Yes, of course.
As much as I would like that to be the future, I don't think VR's future lies in gaming. I think it lies in the educational purposes. Like, oh, okay, maybe we make just a little headset like you said Oculus is making, or HTC makes a headset that is just you put it on. It's its own little thing, and it just streams HD video, and you can like be in a boxing match, or you can go visit the 16th Chapel, or Rome, or just something like that. I think that's going to be a lot more appealing than anything else. And then there's also like the other things that people like to do you can get on your PlayStation and HTC, but I'm not going to get into that now.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that one interesting way to think about where we're headed with all this, whether it's augmented reality or virtual reality, is like in the background here, I have a television playing with a football game. I don't remember how much I paid for the television, but let's say I paid $1,000. If I'm just wearing a pair of glasses and an augmented reality or even a virtual reality can give me a 30-inch television for the cost of a $1 app, now we're talking about not needing to purchase physical goods and your screen basically being these different apps as opposed to this thing. And imagine, it's not hard to imagine getting to a point where, all right, there's already some great cinema experiences. So like, let's say I put on a headset to watch Inception on a movie theater on like a 100-foot screen, an IMAX screen, a virtual IMAX screen, and then my brother, who's in Colorado, he puts it on too, and I sit next to him in the theater. Like that seems like that's a very conceivable thing to imagine. And for the cost of VR headset, we're getting this like IMAX experience. This thing that we couldn't fit in our homes, and so I do think that like the social component is going to be a huge part of it, and maybe like gaming is such a social. Social is such a big element of gaming that like, I've said in the past, someone asked me like, do I think Mario franchise, will that come to VR? And that's hard to predict because Nintendo is, they're
Nintendo.
Yeah, they're Nintendo. So I would never predict anything with them. But I said to them, like, whether or not there's like a Mario game in the next few years, one thing that would be cool is like if you and I are going to meet, we're going to do another podcast. Instead of meeting like my home and your home, like if we could just meet at in the Mushroom Kingdom and we're just like hanging out there. Like I feel like that'd be a really chill place to like
just hang out.
Like Goombas are just walking by, and like that's the kind of thing that is so easy to make happen in VR. It just transport you to a different place and a different shared reality that you and I can coexist in. And obviously Mario. We'll see what Nintendo wants to do.
There is that hint towards a VR headset for the Switch.
Right. Yeah, I
think that's... you know what? If anyone's going to do like an awesome VR experience, I would put it on Nintendo. Because imagine if you could play, like if you could be Link in a first-person view exploring Hyrule.
Right.
Then again, you might run into a Pokemon Go situation again where people are walking off cliffs and stuff. Lawsuits.
Right. Well, that's like it's the thing that you kind of come back to in a lot of this, and it's pretty common these days when we joke about like making a $200 million movie about Battleship. Like so much of, but like as ridiculous as that is, so much of what is successful and what gets people's attention is intellectual property, it's IP. So like if I'm telling my friend who's a gamer, like, oh, you got to try. Got to get the Rift, you got to get the Vive, you got to get the PSVR. And they're like, oh, well, what game should I play? And I'll list a few games. And he's like, all right. But if I said, hey, Zelda's coming to VR, it's
Oh
600
boy,
bucks. He'd be like, all right,
I'm buying Zelda. You know.
So Nintendo has such power that they deserve for creating such great games and such great characters and franchises that I think that it would just really help the VR industry as a whole if they were to get into it in that way and bring these characters we love into virtual reality.
Well, I think that ends up, that's a good jumping off point here because like the next thing I really want to talk to you is about like the few, like gaming today, and I were, when you launched the book, we were in the middle of the Wii U, and yes. I love that console. Like right. that, I think the Wii U is a fantastic console. I know how we say, the games are what sell consoles. There's a crap ton of amazing games on the Wii U.
Yeah, I love the Wii U as well.
Oh, good. I finally got a fellow Wii U lover. You're not going to crap all over it, huh?
Well, but that's the thing. It's like, who crapped? I mean, from a sales perspective, it was not super successful. No. Like, no one's denying that. But every Wii U owner that I've talked to loves it. I don't, like, so I guess it was, whoever's crapping on it is people that don't have it for the most part.
The jealous haters.
Well, I mean, Nintendo made a lot of bad decisions with that console, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Especially from a marketing standpoint. But it kind of also shows you, like, the strength of Nintendo. It's the games. Like, we think of them as a first-party hardware maker, and they are. But they do make better games than any other developer out there. And
now, do you think that's because Nintendo actually takes the time to finish a game and not do what Sony and Xbox and PC, like EA and all that do is like, well, okay, here's the game in a usable state. We'll patch it later.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. There was a phrase at Nintendo that I think's in the book, like a Peter Main phrase. He was one of their marketing VPs. It was like there's no wine until it's time. Like we're not going to release something until it's totally ready. And that Nintendo is unique in that regard. Obviously, they have the luxury of being in that position. I'm sure a lot of game companies would like to do that. And Nintendo has the resources and reputation to do that. But it's also a mentality thing. Like other developers think that we'll release it and we'll patch it. And that's not necessarily a wrong mentality either, because you're getting feedback from a lot of users, but at the same time, they're kind of like your guinea pigs in a way. So there's like a pro and a con to that, but you are able to then cater it exactly to what they want. And so I think that Nintendo's unique way of doing things does deliver a certain type of experience. And, they've done it so consistently and so many times over the past 30 years that you have to imagine that their strategies, like waiting until things are ready and really giving it the time, have to be a huge part of why they're able to so consistently deliver.
Yeah, and like I had this conversation, like once again I was at that Mario Odyssey thing, and I was asking people like, how many of you bought a Wii U? Because that's like one of my favorite things to do is talk to people about, these failed consoles like Dreamcast and stuff. But like none of them bought a Wii U, and everyone was there for Mario. And I'm like, well, if you didn't have a Wii U, why are you gonna get a Switch now? Well, Mario is amazing. It's always a finished game, and not to mention the Switch is an amazing console, and it's something new. It's got a gimmick. I always say that. Like the Switch still has a gimmick, much like the Wii and the Wii U.
Yeah.
But it's still like the Switch is a good gimmick. You know what I mean? Like, okay, I can, like before you came on, I was playing Xenoblade Chronicles 2 on my Switch. And I was like, oh, I'll wait for Blake. And then when you came on, I just put it over there, and I was like, okay, I'm done. Oh, wait, I still got it right here.
Nice.
It's a good, it's a good handheld, and I don't mind it, but I feel I do have some worries with the Switch. And I don't know about you, like, what do you think the Switch is now? Like, this whole first year has been amazing, starting with Zelda, then we got Mario Kart, then we got Splatoon, Fire Emblem Warriors, Odyssey, and now Xenoblade. So, what did you get a Switch day one, or and what's your opinion on it?
I haven't bought anything because, as I told you before the show, like I'm really in a crazy part of the writing phase, so I don't want to be tempted with this stuff. But obviously, the Switch has done well. They have been front loaded with content. The thing that's most promising to me about it, like when you look at 2018 and maybe have some valid concerns about it, is that unlike with their previous consoles, the Wii included, which was obviously a huge success, Nintendo has historically been, less accommodating to third-party developers, or than like Sony or Microsoft. So I think the fact that we even see Doom on the Switch is like representative of a huge type of shift. That's also just not the type of game that they would usually like support. So I think that gives me promise. Where I'm a little bit concerned, though not overly so, is just the like handheld versus console aspect. Because one thing I noticed with my Wii U, and maybe I'm curious what your experience was I have this TV here, but I would always end up just looking at the screen that was right in front of me. And then at some point I was like, all right, well then I may as well just put something else on the TV, because I'm not even looking at the TV, and it's like a little bit distracting. And so it really just became a handheld for me that was like tethered to a console, which was then weird because I couldn't take it with me when I traveled. Luckily the Switch you can. Luckily it's like a self-sufficient portable. But I worry about the like console aspect, and even just the, I realize that our culture has changed, and people sitting around the living room playing games is not as popular as it once was. But like, I have a lot of great memories of playing Mario Kart 64 and other stuff with friends, or even playing stuff with my family. And I just hope that they don't lose that element of it, that they give you a reason to not just have it play, as the portable version, but to actually take advantage of a living room experience.
I feel like that's an effort where the Switch is kind of failing now, though.
Right.
Of the games released, it's all been mostly single player. Like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, that's not single player, but at the same point in time, that's also a game that makes and breaks friendships.
Right, but I guess no, you're right, and those are online multiplayers too. I think that like what was really great about the Switch was what they were able to capture and convey in like those early ads. The ones with like they made it feel very social. Like people are bringing it with them. Maybe people wouldn't really bring it to a party and play with their friends, but like I want to make sure that they don't lose that aspect of it. That it's not just something you play on the subway, but that it is like, even if you're not going to play it in your living room, that you are going to play it with friends at a party, or that it is going to be this thing that you do with other people and not just online people, but that you can also take advantage of with family and with friends.
Yeah, like, I don't think, whenever my friends come over, we usually don't play on the Switch, though. I hate to say it. Like, there's some good games, but one thing that's my biggest thing is, like you said earlier, the Switch had a very front-loaded first year.
Right.
And I'm kind of curious, like, what's 2018 going to have now? You know what I mean? Because I understand, I always say third party is what makes you buy a console, but the first party is what makes you stay there, My friend has Call of Duty on PlayStation. I'm going to get a PlayStation now to play with my friend. But now PlayStation has games like Uncharted 4, Detroit Become Human, and all that good jazz, and that's going to make me stay here. So, like, you need a balance of third party and first party on this thing. And for right now, we're getting some third party support, and people are, like, dabbing their toe, and understandably, because we was such a flop with third parties.
Right.
But, I'm curious how that's going to end up in the next year, because, like, a lot of people buy Nintendo consoles just because it has Mario, Zelda, Metroid, and all that.
Right.
And the next year, I don't see anything. I think maybe Retro's new game will be ready, but Metroid is nowhere near ready. There's no way Metroid comes out next year. Maybe 2019 at the soonest, but there's no way it's going to be ready next year. What do you think of that? Like, do you think the Switch is going to continue? I know analysts are saying that the Switch is going to continue on, but do you think it is, or do you think it's not?
Well, maybe the best comp to look to is the Wii. Like you said, super successful console, and part of it was that it was gimmicky, but like gimmicky in a good way. Though a lot of people had the experience of like buying a Wii, playing it a ton for like months and months, and then kind of never really playing it again. So it didn't have like a long tail. So I think that is a valid concern. I think I'd feel a little bit more comforted if I knew some of the stuff that they were looking forward to in 2018, whether it was first party or whether it was third party. And I guess like the answer is at this point we can't know. Maybe there's reason to be cautious, but I do kind of come back to the idea of like Doom being on the Switch, at least as like something that gives me a little bit of confidence that like
a glimmer of hope.
Yeah, like that is something that they would just not have done, and not done in the way that they're doing it now. So like at least Nintendo, they seem like they're doing things to try to prevent mistakes of the past, and maybe they'll work, maybe they won't, maybe they'll lead to unintended consequences of doing that. But at least I'm glad that they seem to be conscious of that and seem to be, putting the players first. People want to play Doom, and people don't want to buy another console, or they want to be able to play it on Switch. So that's good.
Yeah, I feel like this. I feel like this is kind of a different Nintendo than we've had for a while. You know what I mean? When they're more willing to do different things like Doom and Skyrim now.
Right.
And wherein before, like, I don't think there's maybe 3 rated M games on the Wii U. Not even like
Yeah.
Bayonetta. I want to say like Nintendo was not that company, and
Right.
now they're trying to. They're not too friendly with creators on YouTube or whatever.
I know. I
But
still hate that, but still, yeah.
yeah, I feel like that's causing a lot of trouble because I know a lot of YouTubers, like, they say, I'm not making Nintendo videos. And that's kind of like, well, kind of losing some advertisement there, guys. But, you
Yeah,
want to
it's
have
so stupid.
you want to have
For-
your hand,
yeah,
you want to have your hands in someone's pockets. They're not going to let you in them. So
right.
I don't know. I'm curious. I think the Switch is gonna stick around, but I'm curious as to its longevity. To be honest,
Yeah.
I'm still like cautiously optimistic. I wasn't burned with the Wii U, like I said. Like you and I, we both loved it. We played so many games on it, and there was a lot of great games for it. But as for being cautious for the Switch, I am because I'm just like, what do you got? What do you got looking forward now? Because undoubtedly, Mario Odyssey and Zelda were both Wii U games that they just ported over. So I'm curious to see what's going to go on there. But
Right.
yeah, I guess. Well, then there are 2 other consoles in this race, though, and that's Sony and Nintendo. Or not Sony and Microsoft's.
Yeah.
And like the PS4 has been astronomical. You know what I mean? But I think they're obviously won this generation. But what do you think of the whole situation with Microsoft? Because you know how in your book Console Wars, they all, Sega thought a lot of their success from the Genesis was because they came first. And I look at the launch of the Xbox One X, and I see that mentality of we're gonna be the first actual true 4K gaming HDR. We're the first there. Look at that. And now you're looking at it, and not it's not selling that well. Yeah, and Microsoft hasn't really released sales data except for the first week.
Right.
I'm curious as to your thoughts towards that. Like, do you see the same Sega Saturn situation that I do, or do you think that I'm just jumping the gun a bit?
I think you're jumping the gun a little bit, but I also think it's reasonable. I think, I guess I say you're jumping the gun just because Sega doesn't exist anymore as a hardware company, and Microsoft is just not like even a flop from Microsoft in the same way that like a flop from Nintendo doesn't mean the end of those brands because Nintendo because they're so prudent with their finances, and Microsoft because maybe they're prudent, maybe they're not, but they have they still are such a big presence in the computer space. So it's like to them, the Xbox is part of maybe like a larger plan. So they're not like out of the game ever. I think that like one of the big problems is like what is their identity? What does make them different or better in their own? Like I don't even know in their own mind what makes them better than Sony.
Well, I feel like the biggest problem, like, I know it looks like that. I got my Nintendo shirt on, the Nintendo thing in the background, the Zelda and all that. It looks like I'm either a Sony guy or a Nintendo guy, but I own every console. I bought a PlayStation Vita for Christ's sakes. I love that handheld. That's an amazing handheld. I was just like, should I buy a Switch or a Vita? I'm like, well, I mean, the Switch has some good games out now, but like the Vita has Persona 4 and Uncharted, so I'd go there first, and it's cheaper. But like, I have every console, but my biggest thing is like, I was an Xbox guy. I had an Xbox 360, but I played Call of Duty and Assassin's Creed 2, and then Halo 3, and that was it. And then so I was an Xbox guy, and then this generation I got a PS4, and I was a PlayStation guy. But I still have my Xbox One, and I play on it a little bit, like Cuphead. Cuphead was the last one I played on. Fantastic looking game. Hard as balls, like Mega Man, but fantastic game. But like my biggest thing is Microsoft kind of doesn't have an identity, like you were saying, and I wonder how much of that was because like when they first announced the Xbox One, they're like, we're gonna be your all-in-one entertainment device that's going to capture the living room because watch your TV through it. You're gonna, watch sports, And it was, like this. Someone took their announcement video, and it's like, TV, sports, Call of Duty,
Right.
TV, and I'm just like, oh, guys. Like Sony did it right 6 months earlier, and they had all that swell of support from people with Sony like me. Like, this is amazing. Here's the PS4, and it's all about games. And I feel like that's what Microsoft kind of shot themselves in the foot, and then they backed that off. And now they're trying to find their identity, and I understand why they launched the Xbox One X now, because they want to leave the Xbox One alone, and the Xbox One X is technically their new console.
Right.
But I don't think the Xbox One X is gonna. I think if they would have just launched a console that supported 1080p 60 frames a second, it was like, here's this thing that is capable of it, but not toted the graphics as a thing. Because, like, for me, I don't think the future of gaming lies in graphics anymore. Because, like, you look at it now, and almost every game out there has amazing graphics.
Right. Right.
But I think the future in games is going to be story and gameplay mechanics and getting the player immersed in this world in new and interesting ways, which Microsoft kind of dabbled on with Quantum Break. But for now, I just don't think that's going to work out for them. And I'm kind of curious as what your opinion on that is.
Yeah. I mean, I think like I remember a time when they were like looking to buy content like television shows and stuff because they were kind of pitching this as Xbox One was going to be like the living room experience and with gaming was a part of it. And that could have been a viable strategy, or it seemed like it could have been. But I never felt like they delivered on like the other components that would make it more valuable than having a PlayStation 4. I think that like trying to establish an identity just as an actual strategy would be helpful, just so that we know what they think that they are, whether we can agree with that or not. And then obviously having first-party titles or second-party titles that show like here's what a Microsoft game is, or here's something that you can only get on
Excuse me.
The Xbox ecosystem. I think is important if they want to separate themselves or try to turn the tide with Sony.
Yeah, I think like that's another big problem because and then again we have to acknowledge though that Microsoft only has 7 first-party studios compared to like Sony's 13, I want to say.
Right.
And I mean, once again, they just did come out and say we're going to commit more resources to first-party development and first-party games, but at the same point in time, like I had this conversation once again with people, and it's always like Sony has Detroit Become Human, Spider-Man PS4, Shadows of War, not Shadows of War, but Spider-Man coming up in the next year, and like you look at their exclusives list compared to Microsoft's, and there's nothing. Right. I mean, State of Decay 2 comes to mind. That's about it. I mean, obviously we're getting a new Halo game. That's like all but confirmed. But other than that, I'm looking at Microsoft being like, if they just would come out, and I feel like the Xbox 360 had the identity of the first-person shooter market. You had Halo, you had Gears of War, and then you had Call of Duty. And then Sony made a deal with Activision for Destiny, and then 2 years later, Activision made another deal with Sony for Call of Duty, and now all you got is Halo on Xbox.
Right.
And I feel like where the Xbox was the bro shooter console, now it's gone. And once again, when you had that bro shooter identity, it was very fickle because you're not really working for the hardcore gamer. You're looking at the casual gamer, the guy that buys Call of Duty year to year, plays with his friends for 6 months, and then it's done. And now there's no one there to support it. And I don't know. It's just in a bad situation. I don't feel like if anyone's going to leave the consoles, I think Microsoft would be the one, but Microsoft wouldn't like leave all out. I think they'd partner with like Steam or whatever, and your Xbox One would now be a Steam box,
Right.
But I don't know what I don't know. I feel like it's an interesting topic, but I don't know. What's your opinion on that? Like, do you think Microsoft is going to bow out, or like if you were to pick one of the three now? Like, obviously, I don't think Nintendo was close with the Wii U, but now I think they're fine. Sony has obviously got a war chest, but I think that leaves Microsoft. I think Microsoft would be the one to bow out, not like fully bow out, like I said.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to fully bow out. I think that, I mean, I guess the answer to your question is like I would continue to bet on Sony until I see evidence to the otherwise. I mean, even just look what they did with PlayStation VR. That is like a small sample size example of like a lot of their strategy. They invested in good content. Like they had an identity. Even the fact that they released the headset earlier than Microsoft, which hasn't released the headset, or even just the fact that they were a console that released the headset shows like they're forward thinking. It technically is a peripheral, so they are trying to come up with different peripherals to entice gamers. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's like a dire situation from Microsoft. I think that I have faith in them. They're gonna do what they say with reinvesting in first party content, and we'll turn it around to some extent. I'm just not sure to what extent that will be. It'll be interesting to see. But I need to go in a few minutes. If
Well, I think I was just about to wrap it up.
Oh, did perfect.
So, yeah, it's pretty good. Is there anything else you want to talk about though before we say goodbye?
No.
No?
Great. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Blake, thanks for joining me. Guys, buy Console Wars, and when your new book, the About VR, is out, or pre-order that, because God knows I want to now.
Awesome.
Anyways, guys, I thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again next time. Bye. You don't want to say bye?
Oh, bye. Bye. Sorry. Bye.
See ya.